So everything finds its place, just as the colour and the beauty do, so does the pain. So let me start with the emotional pain, the pain and the loss. My brother Adam wrote these words 28 years ago, shortly before he died. The fangs of lassitude bite deep within my soul, prostituting its emotion in the realms of trivia. God, for I need a God, give me back my sustaining life. Return the bleeding wounds of motivation to my turbid mind. I seem to drain the pulse from my own vacuous heart, leaving emptiness to replenish the decaying blood. The proliferation of my stagnant mind dulls all thought within its muffled walls. I feel now the draining in my stomach, as if my natural humanness is slowly filtering away. Please pray that I do not once more become the sterile alien. My brother Adam was tall, he was good looking, he had chocolate brown skin, Anglo-Indian. He had a really quirky sense of humour and very charismatic. All the girls loved him and all the boys wanted to be like him. He was highly intelligent and studying at his first term at Oxford University. So in short, it would appear that he had everything to live for and everything that we all aspire to be and to want. And yet, at just 20 years of age, he chose to take his own life. So I was 17 at the time, and he was my rock, he was my world, he was everything. Our mother had died 4 years before, when I was 13, and we very much protected each other through her death. We didn't speak about our grief. It was just an unspoken bond that we formed over time, and especially after our father was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where he spent the best part of the year. And Adam and I were just there for each other, and we really held each other through all the grief and the pain and the loss. So when he died, my world shattered around me, and everything I knew and trusted had been taken from me, and it didn't feel like the world was a safe place to be anymore. And I very much became haunted by the question, why? And I found my brother's diaries, and what I found was an internal world of conflict, of doubt, of questioning, and of turmoil, and above all else, of extreme emotional pain. And his words really reflect this. Well, my vacuous life rolls on. I feel now completely bland. All my hopes, desires, loves and hates have been flattened into banal, placid thoughts. I no longer have a purpose or confidence in life. I feel so worthless. Where is interest, where is belief and trust? I once glowed with boyish ferocity, but now my leaden veins pass apathy instead of blood. I lack direction. In apathy, am I truly consistent? Paths lie entangled before me. Their confusion averts decisions. Time weeps onwards with suffocating incessancy. The rabid thoughts that disease my soul are no longer the external, but instead the essence. As I have gradually let life stream from my chilling veins, then so have I frozen its fire with time. I seek tears. I need some channel for my heart. But as I drift into silent mourning, a great, ugly, morose emptiness ebbs my sorrow and perpetrates homeless fallacies. God, let me cry. So what I saw was a huge mismatch between the face my brother showed to the world and what was happening on the inside in his internal world. And much later over time I came to realise that the bigger the mismatch is between those two faces or those two worlds, how much that really feeds mental illness. And he was only able to express his emotion and how he the extent of his pain. But I found one line in his writing that I grasped hold of, and that was, all my hopes lie with TJ. And from that moment I would live for him, and I didn't realise at that time how heavy a cup that was to live for him for so many years. So what was the effect on me? And I remember very clearly, about 6 weeks after he died, I wrote to a close friend of mine and I said, I don't want to die, but I don't know how to live. And that's exactly as it felt to me. And I started developing panic attacks, and I didn't know what a panic attack was then. And I used to feel like my chest was tightening and I'd get short of breath. And the biggest thing to me was that I would feel like I wasn't really in the world, and I felt really disconnected. And for me that was so frightening, because my biggest fear was that I would go mad, as I'd seen my father, and through some psychotic episodes that he had when he became ill, and as he was ill throughout much of my childhood. And that fear was so powerful, and it sort of was fed very much by other people's fears, because people were so afraid, the people around me were so afraid that I would do what Adam had done as well. And that fear fueled my own fear, and I was sort of caught up in this big maelstrom of fear. And I think the other thing that I realised that I overwhelmingly felt wasn't guilt, and many people said to me, you mustn't feel guilty, Tara, and I didn't ever feel guilty, but I felt incredibly helpless. And I think I realised later on how that drove so many of the things that I've done in my life, to become a lifesaver, to become a physiotherapist, and to become a firefighter, and now also working in mental health. Because I had this desperate need to rescue people and to be able to help them in a way that I hadn't been able to help my brother or my mother. And the other thing that I realised, and that again much later on and only quite recently, was that I saw my brother's death as the ultimate rejection of my love. That my love wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough to keep him alive. And the impact of that throughout my life then on relationships, because my love was never enough, so how could I have a healthy relationship if I felt that? And I guess I dissociated very much Adam from the word suicide and from suicide, because I couldn't put them together, because in my mind he was on a pedestal and he was perfect. And he didn't have a dark secret, he wasn't a drug addict or any of those things, he was perfect, and I couldn't put those two things together. And the irony really is that what caused him so much pain was his own perfectionism, but also how other people saw him as perfect, and so he felt that he was a fraud, because he wasn't as perfect as everybody thought that he was. And I really fueled that through my own, needing to keep him as this perfect Adam. And I also realised very much the ripple effect of suicide. And when I wrote to Alex Garland, who wrote the foreword to my book, and I said, I've written a book about my brother, would you mind reading the manuscript for me? And he wrote straight back to me, and he said, please send it to me, Tara. Your brother's death has haunted me for 25 years. And recently, doing the book launch over here and meeting many of my brother's friends again, I realised that every single one of them, partly because they were teenagers, but even many other people as well, have been deeply affected by his death, because it would appear that he was what we all aspire to be and to want, and because suicide is so very difficult to understand. So my way of coping, I guess, was to what I call use band-aids. And for me, my band-aids were running, and I would just to keep busy and to keep moving and to never stop. Because I didn't want to stop, because if I stopped I might have to think, and if I thought, perhaps I would find what my brother had found, and perhaps I would find that I didn't want to be here, that I didn't want to live anymore, and that frightened me. And I hid in relationships, because I would crave anything that gave me that feeling of safety. So just to be in somebody's arms, in the way that I guess my mother's arms had been taken from me before I was ready to let go. And so I sought that feeling of safety in relationships. And so, as I said, I feel like so many years of my life have been governed by fear. And there's a line that my brother wrote, which I think says perfectly what I'm trying to say. My darkness pursues me, fear eludes me, yet my need for it to show me truth goes on. And I think Adam was so very right. Fear did show me, and I needed to look at the fear in order to find my own truth. And that the darkness really was pursuing me, and I was trying to outrun it, and I couldn't. So I had to slow down to enable me to find my own truth. And so I started eventually questioning, and I questioned everything about life, and it terrified me. And I started searching. And I think the thing about questioning and the thing about searching is if you search hard enough and long enough, eventually you find something. And I guess what I found was my path and my own truth. And how did I do this? I certainly didn't have any great epiphany. I didn't wake up one morning and think, wow, I'm fixed. I think I kept hoping that I might, but I didn't. And I worked really, really hard. And I tried many, many different things. And I think what I've realised about therapy or any sort of help is that it's very much about finding the right thing or the right therapy at the right time for the right person and with the right person. And therapy, I think, for me was so important. And when I actually stopped and started seeing a therapist, I started re-scripting and reprocessing the grief as an adult, and I needed to do that. And I needed to actually re-experience and feel the pain that I had felt as a teenager when I wasn't able to, or I didn't have the emotional maturity to really process that. And I had to look at the fear, and I started, I think, with the physical fears because they were easier, and I didn't realise how many physical fears I had of heights, of darkness, of being alone. And the irony is, as a firefighter, I spend half my life up a ladder or in the darkness. But those physical fears were easier for me, but it enabled me to access some of the emotional fears, I think. And those really core emotional fears, which for me, as I've said, were very much around rejection, around worthiness, around fear of loss, and of not being good enough. And I started to realise that there were certain triggers, and sometimes obscure, strange things that would come up, and often in relationships, but through other things as well. And in that moment when something triggered me, I would become that child again, and I would be reacting to that trigger as a child, not as an adult. And I think that realisation then allowed me to recognise almost, I guess, what the scars of my past had been, and how I could stop and wait till I could be adult Tara again before reacting. And I guess I discovered that I did have this inner child, and that that governed too much of me, if you like, and how I was living my life, because there were so many things that would trigger me because I had so many fears. And so I started peeling back the layers, all the layers that I had created around myself to try and keep myself safe. And I guess in peeling back those layers, what I found was a connection to myself. And I realised very much that strength and vulnerability go hand in hand. I also found a sense of belonging, and I guess I sought out that belonging because I needed it, and I found that in the fire brigade. I found it through doing community work, and as a lifesaver, and later in mental health. And again, that sense of belonging was quite connecting for me. And the other thing I did was I found my passion, and I realised I didn't have any memories of joy as a child. I couldn't remember how it felt to experience joy and passion. And when I found my passions again, it gave me that sense of joy, and that kind of being fully engaged in the moment, and the feeling of kind of flow. And that was just so powerful again in connecting me to the world around me. And I did many self-care things. I ate well, I slept, I exercised, I tried to meditate. I was always hopeless at it, but I did try. And I did many, many things, and I think those simple things that I realised that when the shit hit the fan, if I could just do those simple things, it gave me the organic foundations of strength where I could stay healthy enough that I could then build from there. And I started writing. And I had never written before, but when I started writing my life story down, what I realised was that, we all have memories and we have thoughts, but we have them in sporadic parts. We never put them all together. And when I wrote my life story down, I had all those memories in front of me, and it was like putting the jigsaw pieces of my life together, and it all unfolded. And I think, when you write, you have to make it make sense in sentences and in paragraphs, and that process of making sense of it in writing made sense of it internally for me as well, made sense of my emotions. And I guess from a physiological perspective, when we think, we use different parts of our brain. So it literally, I think, gave me a different perspective on which to look at my life. And it was so powerful in giving me self-understanding. And that self-understanding gave me self-compassion as well, as to why perhaps I hadn't got married and had children and done all the things that I thought that I really, really wanted to do. And that self-compassion, with that, it gives you compassion for other people. And that compassion for other people is what connects you to them as well. And I think we all need other people. And it's just, for me, it was just so important to have that sense of connection and of, when I was writing, of knowing, of something felt right, even though I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that what I was doing was taking me somewhere, and it was absolutely in line with what I was supposed to be doing in that moment. So what my experiences and what I realised most profoundly that my experiences gave me was that feeling of connection to myself, to the world around me and to other people. And I began to really realise that that is so very much the essence of life. And it also gave me my meaning and my purpose in life, that by sharing mine and my brother's story, that we could make a difference. And the very first time I found myself talking somebody out of suicide, and I spoke to this lady many times over a period of a few months, she rang me and she said, "Tara, I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know how you knew, but you knew." And in that moment, something fundamental changed in me, because I realised that it was only through the experiences that I'd had that I could actually make that difference to somebody else. And I hadn't been able to save my brother, but I actually could do that for somebody else. And I think I found my truth, and I found the strength to be true to myself and my values and be the person that I wanted to be, not the person that other people maybe expected me to be. And very often people would say to me, just be who you want to be, Tara. And I think, well, don't you think that I'm trying? And I tried and I struggled for so long, but to be able to finally get to the point where I can say I am who I want to be. And I guess something fundamental must have changed in my own sense of spirituality as well, because I would always describe myself as atheist, and now I would probably say that I'm agnostic. And I think for me that comes from a faith in myself and I guess a dedication to truth in some ways, my own truth. And I realised that the depth of my struggle was really proportionate to the extent of the growth that I then felt. And that my challenges gave me a richer experience of life. And I had a life that was full of colour, and it had many shades of darkness as well, but in a way it was the darkness that made the colours brighter. And I spent so long trying to get rid of all my wounds, and I just wanted it to be finished, and I wanted to not acknowledge that they were there, and I realised that actually they're a part of me, and that actually my wounds are what guide me and what make me who I am. And I don't want to get rid of them anymore, I just blend them into my life. And they make me who I am. So 28 years later, I guess I see what life gave me, not what it took from me. And in some ways, perhaps I've found everything that my brother was searching for, in terms of truth, in terms of meaning, in terms of compassion, peace and connection. And they were all the things that I found. So I wanted to finish just with, I guess, with some of the beauty. I started with the pain, and I hope I can finish with some of the beauty that comes, again, from my brother's words. A word of precious beauty. Kindness, a thought of ecstatic purity. Peace, the banner to which our natures should and could abide. If only these were so. If only we could pursue them with unselfishness. Our spirits pass by their meanings, so often too preoccupied with heartless self-concern. If we could overcome our piteous cowardice and recognise the righteousness that stands so agonisingly near, but which we choose to mask in pretend ignorance, then we could achieve nature's ultimate divinity, peace. Peace of thought and peace of community, peace of mind. From there flourishes good and justice. May truth lead me by example and give me the strength to adhere to words alone. There are many signs of suicide. People almost always will give some signs of suicide. There are certain things, sudden erratic changes in behaviour. Often people take more like risk-taking behaviour, but also when people say things like, people would be better off without me. And those certain words that people say, which really are kind of like a red flag, that something's wrong, and that those real feelings of worthlessness of, most people that die by suicide, almost everyone, they don't actually want to die. It's just at that point in time that feels like the only way out of the emotional pain that they're in. And when I describe it to people, I will say to people, you imagine you're in the most physical pain that you could possibly be in, but you can't take a painkiller. And that's what it feels like to someone who's suicidal, that there's no other way out of the pain. But it's not actually normally that they actually want to die. Share Adam's mental state, or did he share his mental state with me? I knew very much so at the time that something was wrong, that something was desperately wrong. But I think I was 17 and suicide never occurred to me. But I remember having this awful feeling of dread that something was wrong. So he did. I knew he was very unhappy, and he hid it very well from many people. And I think in retrospect, looking back, as many people do, he sort of would gently reach out a little bit and give a little bit to one person and a little bit to someone else and a little bit, so that actually it was very difficult for anyone to put the picture together. To realise that. And I think, a lot of his writing was based around how he saw seeking help as a sign of defeat. And what, we know is that it's so important to seek help. But he saw that as defeat, so he didn't access any help. Yeah. It's interesting because in terms of mental illness, women suffer from mental illness more than men. From depression and anxiety, but 3 times as many men die by suicide as women. And the reasons for that, again, there's no statistics to show, evidence for it, but I think that men, and specifically young men, to actually seek help. Men don't tend to seek help. They don't have the same social support networks as women have. They don't talk about their emotions and their feelings. But suicide in 18 to 45-year-olds is now the biggest cause of death in young men. And I think, that it's interesting to see, as you track through time, the history of suicide rates and how they've changed over time, but they are increasing. And in Australia last year, there was 500 more deaths by suicide last year than there was in the previous year. They use more aggressive means, but actually that's not the case. That certainly in Australia it's more about access to the means, and that in Australia the most common cause of death by suicide is hanging, because people can, and in China it's jumping from high places. So it's actually not that men use more aggressive means than women, but I know that that's often been put forward as a reason why. So in America it's gunshot. And in China it's high places because there's lots of high buildings, and in Australia it's hanging because everyone can find a piece of rope. Access to a piece of rope is much easier than access to drugs for most people, or for everybody, depending on how you know. So I think that poisoning is the second most common cause. Does run in families, and it's not. Specifically there's no specific gene or genetic link, but we know that people who have had a suicide of a member of their family are at much greater risk of suffering suicide themselves. And the same in schools, the same in sort of wider community circles as well, but certainly in the family, that it does put, so it's not an isolated, suicide is not just an isolated event. When I talked about the ripple effect, I mean that ripple effect is, it goes on, and it goes out through so many spheres and layers of society, and immediately within the family, but then out from there as well.
Yeah, because you did mention.
True. I think that it's on so many different levels, and as how you get support, and also why is someone at greater risk, other than, is it just the direct emotional trauma, but also, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there's something, whether it's an energetic thing, or whether it's, learned experience, or whether it's, seeing through your parents and learning through your parents as role models who might have suffered their own, who knows. I think there's so many different levels, and there's no, one answer or right or wrong, if you like.
Yeah, thank you.
I think with
people accessing help and accessing support, and had Adam access support early on, I think that would have made a huge difference, because it was so internalised. But and like you said, and what we know even about mental health and mental illness is that the earlier you seek help, the far better the outcome. It's no different to me breaking my ankle and going to the physio and the doctor straight away and putting rest ice compression elevation on. I am going to recover better. And it's exactly the same with any sort of trauma, in terms of allowing someone the freedom to speak and feel safe and supported in their grief. And because as a child you don't have the emotional maturity to even know what grief is, or to process it, or to navigate it, or to, and I think I could see that spiral of internal emotions, that the more they were kept within, and the more, he might try to put a little bit out here, but the more it built and built and built and built, and he became iller and iller and iller. And what we know is that once someone's severely ill, it's so hard to get them back. It's so hard, and you need so much help, so much support, and and the outcome is not as good.
Do you think it would be better now? I mean, you don't really live in England.
I think that the support services and the realisation that what people need in grief and trauma and children is much better now in schools than it was, definitely. And some of the things that friends come to me with their kids and say that they're learning about emotional, it's like, wow, that's amazing, and giving emotions colour and stuff. So say I feel red today, I feel, and interestingly in the fire brigade now, they're starting to develop ways for men to identify their emotions and say, give them colours, because rather than saying, because I don't know how to express it. So, you can go, I'm in the red today, orange, I'm feeling a bit dodgy, green, I'm good. And it's simple, but, we're teaching adults to do that, and it works. It works. So, and to teach kids to do that is so powerful. And as a way to make it okay, and to talk about your emotions when you can't, I remember always being, say, but what do you think, Tara? What do you feel? And I was like, huh? What? I don't know. And I think if you can start doing that when you're a kid, to go, okay, that's actually sadness. Oh, that's anger. That's, it is so powerful in being able to express that, and like you said, bring those two worlds in line with each other, between the external and the internal world. And that ultimately creates mental health. I found, it was interesting when I was writing the book, and people say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm writing. What are you writing about? Oh, I'm writing about suicide. And I go, oh. And then they'd tell me their story. And so many men would say, and it was like freedom to go, actually, I thought about it. And that in itself, and allowing someone the space and a safe space for them to tell you their story in a way which, is real to them without being judged, is so powerful in itself. Even, that's what people say. People don't ask the question, are you having thoughts of suicide, because they don't know what to do with the answer, which is fair enough. But, just listening and letting someone feel safe enough to tell you how they actually feel, and know that, you're not going to judge them for it, in itself helps. And people often say that. They just go, oh, I feel so much better now. So I think that definitely, and I think that connection, when I talked about connection, is sort of what, in terms of suicide prevention and talk to people who are suicidal, you try to reconnect them with something that has meaning to them. And it can be very often something really simple, like if they have a pet. If you can reconnect them to the fact that their pet needs them, or somebody that cares about them, and that's how you kind of try to bring the conversation round, because most of the time people will say nothing, no one, there's no one. And then actually you can normally go around and find something that will reconnect them to life again. And it can be really simple, and it can be a pet, it can be a person, it can be anything that makes them want to get up in the morning. And those things are so powerful in taking out that crisis moment and that situation.